Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling with more breakdown of Dynasty Duels. 1983 Iowa was a phenomenal team, 5 champions, 9 All-Americans, and we have one of those All-Americans with us. Jeff Kerber was the second 4-time state champion in Iowa high school history, went on to the University of Iowa. As you said, a 3-time All-American. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
Was
That's
there
a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about the 4-time state champion being the second, so that was a pretty new thing. Bob Steenledge had broken the code and won it a few years prior, but did you feel like there was some inherent pressure being a 4-timer going to the University of Iowa and what the expectations were?
Yeah, actually, Steenledge won it 17 years before I did, so there was a huge gap in there. But, yeah, I felt a little bit of that pressure, especially going into, Gable's world. So
where'd that pressure come from? Just yourself, or did family?
Yeah, it did. And I had some dysfunction, with my family, and my dad was an alcoholic, and he's recovered now. He's been sober for almost 30 years now, but at the time at the peak of it, and he was a high intensity guy, and I'm certainly not blaming him, but it was just, yeah, I mean, if my life would have been better balanced, and me as well, I think some of the pressure that came from just not having it together. So.
What was wrestling like in Emmetsburg, Iowa during that time?
Well, we had really, my dad started the program with some other dads. I mean, really launched it, and we were really a non-entity. We had Britt and Algona, 2 kind of powerhouses right next door, and we were kind of a nobody. But through our little kids program, we started to really kick some butt. And by the time I got to high school, we really were the power. We won 4 titles in a row, and had really a great team. So it was fun.
What was the reaction when you won your 4th title in Emmitsburg?
Well, it's kind of a crazy story, Kyle. Actually, my senior year in high school, the first day of practice, my senior year, my coach had an aneurysm. He was wrestling with one of my teammates and had an aneurysm, and he spent the whole year in a coma. And I actually ended up, me and another guy, Danny Kaufman, who was a couple-time state champion, we ended up kind of being the coaches. So it was really a time I really had to grow up kind of. And then he got out of the hospital the week of districts and sat in my corner at the state tournament. He had a cane, and he couldn't hardly walk. He couldn't speak hardly. I mean, it paralyzed part of him. And so, so really it was kind of good in the sense that it really put things in perspective. All of a sudden, it wasn't about winning a 4th title or even the team. It was just about life, and it ended up being kind of a great celebration, having him back and being able to get it done.
So if you went to Emmetsburg, you live in Texas right now, but if you went to Emmetsburg, what do you think the response would be? Would people want to talk to you and say hi?
Well, yeah. I mean, I spent my whole life there, really. After I graduated from University of Iowa, I went back and joined our family business, and my dad got sober, and we really, we had a great business there with, a bunch of employees, and then I ran the little kid wrestling club, and we won a bunch of titles again. Yeah, I mean, Emmetsburg to me I spent my whole life there, and a lot of good things happened. A lot of lives were changed through wrestling.
Was there any other option other than Iowa for you at that point, being a 4-time state champ?
I took one other visit. I went to Wisconsin, and they had a great program then. The year before, my senior year in high school, either my senior or my junior year, they had 3 national champions in the same year. They never won the title, but they had Lee Kemp, Jimmy Haynes, Jack Reinwan. There's a Christensen. They had, they were winning titles. And so I took a look at their program, but I wanted to go to Iowa.
What's that like when Gable recruits you?
Oh, it was fun when he came in. He flew in with Roy Carver into our little town of 3,800, and they landed their plane on our little landing strip there and picked him up. And so it was pretty cool. And my dad, you know, kind of a character. And he was still living big then, you know, kind of a party guy. And so it was fun. Yeah, Carver actually came to my house. So it was pretty neat.
So making the transition going into the University of Iowa, what was that transition like going from small town, four-time state champ into the big time Iowa wrestling room?
It was a hard transition for me because I physically wasn't ready for college wrestling. I was technically fine. I had wrestled that summer. My senior year in high school, I made the junior world team and wrestled in Mongolia in the junior world championships. And that was a good team. We had two Schultz brothers and Raimi Lewis, Roger Frizzell, Randy Willingham. We had a real good team, Mike Evans. And, you know, I trained all summer in Brockport, New York with them, and then went over there. So technically I was ready, but I cut weight. I wrestled 126 my senior year in high school. And then to make the team, I had to make 125 and a half. So I watched my weight all summer long. And then when I got to Iowa in the fall, you know, Randy Lewis was wrestling at 134. If I wanted to wrestle in the lineup, I had to go 26. So I really watched my weight all fall. So I really cut weight for almost a year and a half. And it wasn't even the weight cutting. It's that I should have been lifting weights. And it's hard to lift weights when you're cutting weight. And I just didn't have the physical, my body. And it wasn't like I did get horsed a little bit on the mat, but it was holding up under Gable's practices. My body just couldn't hold up under that kind of training. I wasn't physical enough yet. And so it was a tough transition. I lost, you know, you could look it up. I think I won about 60% of my matches, maybe 2/3. And lost, you know, 1/3. Qualified for the NCAAs and actually had a decent, kind of started getting better at the end of the year. I started to kind of do okay. I got 3rd in the Big Ten that year. And then in the Nationals, I got beat by Jerry Kelly from Oklahoma State in a close match. And he went on and I got beat by a kid named Byron McGlathry from Tennessee Chattanooga, who was 2nd or 3rd seed in a close match. And then I didn't get to wrestle back. Actually, Jerry Kelly beat him. Then back then, if your guy didn't go to the semis, you didn't get to wrestle back. So I was either 1-1 or 0-1 at the national tournament. I think I was 1-1 at the national tournament. And then I redshirted and lifted weights, you know, for a year or two, a year and a half actually, pretty much daily, and got bigger and stronger. So.
Would you have done better at a different program? Was Iowa the right fit in hindsight?
I mean, it's hard to second guess stuff. No, not necessarily. I think if I had to do it over with, I wouldn't have been quite so anxious to think I had to wrestle as a freshman. You know, I had it in my mind, and Gable did too, and my dad kind of did too, that I needed to be in the lineup, and really, it hurt my confidence a lot. I mean, and that day was going to happen anyway. I was going to get beat up a little bit. That's just the way it is when you go from high school to college. It's a whole different game. And although I see kids doing it now, which is remarkable to me, but I think if I would have sat out and just lifted weights and trained, maybe it would have helped. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I still had a chance to win the next year and the next year after that. So I don't know.
Well, let's look at this 1983 year. This was unbelievable when you break it down. There were 9 Big Ten champions. Only Rico lost matches, so he got 4th. Everyone else won, so an unbelievable tournament. And then at the NCAA championships, you had 9 All-Americans, 6 in the finals, 5 champs, just an incredible tournament. What was it about that year that it was able to gel and have such amazing results?
Well, I mean, you had veteran studs there. You had 2 Bannock brothers that, you know, they were seniors. You had Barry Davis, that was an Olympic silver medalist. And then you had my class, which is a very good class. Jim Zaleski, Pete Bush, Mark Terzino, and Tim Riley. and hope I didn't leave anybody out. Those are the guys that come to mind. And they were juniors. And so you just had guys that had been in the room for a long time that were very good, and everybody found a weight class. You didn't have anybody getting pushed out, really, that I can recall. And so it's just one of those deals where everything kind of came together. And because usually, you know, you have a guy that can't fit in the lineup somewhere, so he's got to move around. And I don't recall that happening. I think everybody kind of had their happy spot in the lineup. And then you just got a bunch of guys that wanted to win. And I think when you have guys that are setting the pace and wanting to win, it kind of brings everybody else along for the ride. And I was probably actually one of those guys that was being brought along for the ride. I know that summer I worked really hard. I mean, that was the hardest I'd ever worked in the summer, was the summer before that. I was super excited about wrestling the right weight and being a junior. And so anyway, yeah, it just kind of all came together.
What was the culture like? You hear that it was a party culture during
brutal.
that time, but
it was brutal.
Was it?
It really was. Yeah, it was. It was almost over the top. There was a lot of intensity and emotions, and there was physical fights and things like that. Just, you know, when guys are really putting 100% into it, they're all in. It's going to be there's going to be some stuff like that. And it was an intense year. I mean, I can remember, I shouldn't even probably tell you this, but I can remember on Halloween that year, we had a party and a bunch of guys got in a fight, and like Lou Bannock, Pete Bush, there's like at least 2 Bannocks in it, and Pete Bush, I remember. And I mean, it was a fist fight. And I mean, who's jumping in between those guys? So, but that didn't happen very often, but that sort of was the atmosphere. It was really a combative kind of atmosphere, and the room was tough. And we had guys that were older still coming in our room, you know, the Raimi Lewis and stuff. That room was, I mean, it was deep. If you wanted an easy day, there wasn't very many options.
Did you guys get along pretty well then, on the whole?
We did, yeah. I mean, it just was part of the thing, you know. I mean, you could, you know, I mean, I think I've noticed with my kids and my grandkids that, you know, boys are different than girls. Now, careful with that, right? But I'm just saying, it seems like boys can get in a fist fight and then the next day they can go hang out together. And I think it was like that a little bit, you know, where there was just a lot of intensity, but everybody still, it wasn't, you know, hatred or anything like that. It was just competitiveness, you know.
Are you proud to be a Hawkeye?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. There was a time where I struggled with, even when my son was at Cornell, I changed colors and I even kind of hated their fans.
Hated Iowa fans or Cornell?
Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why'd you hate them?
Because my son was wrestling against them, and I always thought they were kind of spoiled babies, which they were a little bit, you know. I mean, it's different era. It's, you know, a generation later, but I got over it, and you know, now I was so disappointed this year because I think they were going to win it, and I was really looking forward to having that happen. So no, I'm pulling for them. It's just, again, just the competitive nature of it. You know, if Justin would have went to a school that wasn't that competitive, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But Cornell had a really good team when he was there. I mean, we got second twice. And his junior year, we should have won. We won everything that year. And then Penn State beat us by 8 points. We had a bad Friday night. And Iowa State released Andrew Long, which they shouldn't have. They released him and let him wrestle that year. He was ineligible to wrestle at Iowa State, and yet he was able to wrestle for Penn State. He got third and got about 3 pins, and that's what won it for him. Otherwise, Cornell would have been the first Ivy League team ever in the history to win a D1 championship. And so the fact that he was wrestling for a competitive team that's where my angst with Iowa fans came, is it was just competitiveness. We wanted to win. I wanted my son to win. And so I went through about a 4 or 5 year deal there where I wasn't you wouldn't have found me wearing an Iowa wrestling hat. And now I do again.
Okay.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Sure.
yeah.
What I mean, as we look at this, like the '83 Iowa team, you just look at it like top to bottom. I don't know that you're going to get a better team. I mean, of course, there's tons of good teams, but where would you rank this '83 team in the all-time great teams?
I don't know, Kyle. I have such a hard time understanding the difference between wrestling now, because the thing that I've noticed here in the last 10 years is that these kids are so well prepared and so ready, that they come right out of high school and compete. That was very rare back in our day. There was only a few guys that did that. There was only like Raimi Lewis, Andre Metzger, Dave Schultz. Those three come to mind. Might have been a couple others, but not very many. It was very hard to step out there. And I know Lincoln McElravy. I remember somebody, I think Gable actually told me that he was the first guy that he could remember that came right out of high school, stepped into the Iowa wrestling room and could go nose to nose with, last year's national champion. And even since then, that would have been in the 90s maybe, or was that even in the 2000s? I mean, I'm getting so old I can't remember. But anyway, now it's commonplace. I mean, these guys step in as freshmen and win it, and are competitive. And so it's so hard for me to judge that. But I mean, as I look at overall dominance, that team was very dominant in the United States. I mean, we were very dominant to have, 5 national champions and 9 All-Americans. And so statistically, you'd have to think it was there. But I mean, wrestling is so good right now. I mean, I watch these guys wrestle and I just marvel at how good they are. They're so good. And does that mean they're better athletes? Well, not necessarily, but wrestling has evolved. I mean, I suppose if you took a guy and, you took him what he was raw talent wise, mentally, competitive wise, and you fast forward him into, 30 years later, I suppose he'd make those adjustments. I got to believe that he'd probably figure out how to do it. But I do think wrestling overall is better now than it was when I wrestled. Now, that isn't necessarily, I'm not putting the guys down that went out there and did it, because if they won the world championships, they beat everybody in the world. If they won the national championships, they beat everybody in the nation. And if they dominated and pinned everyone like Bruce Kinston did, they dominated and pinned everyone, just like Bruce Kinston did. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the sport has evolved. It's better. I mean, they flurry better, they defend better, they train better. It's better, my opinion.
Isn't there a legendary story about your dad on a West Coast swing where Iowa got beat and your dad said something from the stands?
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Can you share that?
So it's my freshman year. It was our first road trip, and I hadn't been beaten in high school, and I still hadn't been beaten in college yet. We'd wrestled like one open tournament, and we wrestled like the Minnesota Quad, and I'd won my 2 or 3 matches. So we go on this West Coast swing. The first night I wrestled Johnny Azevedo, national champion, and he beats me like 21-5 or 6. I think I had 6 escapes. He just embarrassed me. And that was my first real humbling. And I think that was probably difficult for my dad to watch too. And then the next day, we drove through the San Andreas Mountains to Cal Poly. So we went from Cal Bakersfield to Cal Poly. And we had to drive through the mountains, and we were late because we didn't realize how long it took. And about 3 guys got sick on the way down there, and we had to stop, and they're puking on the side of the road. And then I think it was either Deanna or Truzino. I think it was Scott Truzino got hurt against Bakersfield, and we didn't have, the only extra guy we had was the 126 pounder, so we knew we were going to forfeit a wave. Anyway, we get down there and we're wrestling Cal Poly, and they're ranked about 21st. We're ranked first. We've won 32. Iowa had won 32 duels in a row. They held the record in the nation for the most dual meet wins. And we're wrestling in this gym. It's about the equivalent of a high school gym, but a big high school gym. And they don't dim the lights, and it's absolutely packed. I mean, packed to the rafters. Whole bunch of Hispanic guys, because that's an area where there's a lot of, I think there's like melons, and I'm not sure, but anyway. So we're wrestling this dual meet. Everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Danny Glenn was ahead and gets beat. I got caught and pinned. Eddie Bannock got upset. Eddie Bannock, the defending national champion, got beat. Well, when Eddie got beat, that cinched the meet. And they had this announcer. And the whole time during this meet, this announcer is revving up the crowd, saying, Iowa's won 32 matches in a row. They had the longest win streak. Their win streak is in jeopardy. He just goes on and on all night long. I mean, really annoying. So anyway, it gets up to Eddie's match, and he goes ahead and tells the crowd, if we win this match, we're going to win the meet. So the crowd is in an all-time frenzy. Now they've won the meet. Eddie wins. The place is just hysterical. I mean, they're just going wild. Louis Bannock goes out and just mops the mat with this guy. He's got this guy, and he's just beating the tar out of him. And the guy stood up. I can't remember exactly where they were at position-wise, but Louis picked him up and just drilled him. And the guy will probably listen to this and get pissed, but he's a bit of an actor. I mean, he was getting smoked, and he just went limp, completely limp. I mean, in the crowd, it was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. This guy's laying in the middle of the mat. It went from being a crazy house to just quiet. And my dad, there's only about 12 fans from Iowa there, and they're all sitting together. And the funny thing is, my wife, who at the time she was still in high school, my wife-to-be, her parents were sitting right next to my parents. Randy Lewis's parents were sitting. So my wife's parents and my parents were 4 out of the 12 people sitting there, or 20 or whatever there was. And my dad, in a deep, booming voice, yells, "Drag him off and bring on another." And the crowd starts just hissing, like, who said that? Who said that? Who said that? And I got my head in my hands like this. I'm embarrassed. And I look down the bench, and our whole bench is just laughing. Gable, too. They're all just laughing. They got their hands down like this, just laughing. So I mean, they wanted to lynch my dad. The crowd did. They wanted to lynch him. The meet went on. Heavyweight went on. The meet ended, and nobody got lynched or anything. But funny, yeah, the guy was fine. My wife was telling me the guy was fine. So we go into the locker room afterwards, and Gable says, he probably shouldn't have yelled that, but that's the kind of attitude you got to have. That's his post-meet. We just lost the longest winning streak ever in wrestling to a team that was ranked about 21st, and Gable opens his post-meet pep talk, or whatever you want to call it, download with, really, that's wrong, but that's the kind of attitude you got to have. So anyway, yeah, my dad was very popular after that.
Now, you mentioned Randy Lewis. Who has a better memory, you or Randy?
Randy. Yeah, for sure.
No question?
None. Yeah, no. On wrestling, he can tell you what the score was and after the second period and all that. To me, it's a little murky.
Well, you seem pretty good to me. You got some good details going.
Yeah, well, only those ones that story there, that was personal. Is like, I mean, I wanted to crawl in a hole. So, and that was a tough road trip. That was my first real humbling experience. We went to Arizona State the next night, and I beat another freshman. I was 1-2, got pinned and got tacked. So it wasn't very fun.
In 2020, just looking back, what does that 83 team mean to you? Do you still keep in touch with those guys?
No, not much, really. I mean, I've been back to a few of the functions, and we'll see them and stuff. And I've had some interaction with the Bannocks. Really as much Steve as Ed and Lou, just through some, like the prayer breakfast on Friday mornings at the NCAAs. I've connected with them a little bit. And then, of course, my class, Pete Bush and Mark Trezino, those two in particular, both being involved in Iowa high school wrestling. We connect once in a while. I mean, we're not buddies, but when we see each other, we enjoy connecting. And then, of course, Randy's my brother-in-law, so he's still got his network of guys. And so, yeah, I'm still somewhat connected, but most of my wrestling stuff is watching it on ESPN, which has been nice, actually. So, but I am getting ready to build a wrestling room here in Texas for my grandkids, so maybe I'll still be around. They don't have many clubs down here, so we're gonna do something in that way.
How about Barry Davis? He is the weight class below you. You ever?
I love Barry. He's a great guy. Whenever I see Barry, we usually have a good 10-minute, 15-minute catch up and give a hug. And yeah, I love Barry. Barry's he didn't have to use words to lead. He led by example. And he was one hardworking man. He was a hard worker. Wow. I don't know if anybody worked any harder than Barry did.